morning and welcome to Geneva Push's next webinar. My name's Mark Hadley and I'll be your host for today. Thank you for a start for coming to 5 things that mean you'll fail assessment. Straight away, I think we're going to have some interesting discussion around the idea of fail. Andrew Hurd's already let us know that he doesn't really believe in fail, and that's going to be a great way to actually get into this topic. Throughout our presentation, we really want you to do that. We want you to be part of what we're doing, so we're encouraging you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions using the question pane. Now, you might notice as you downloaded GoToWebinar that you have a control panel, and one of the little turn down tabs you have on that control panel is questions. So if you type in a question, I'll be able to pick that up as I'm hosting the webinar, and I'll be able to pass it on to Al and Andrew when the time comes. First up, we're going to have a bit of an interview with them, but then towards the end of our time together, we'll start feeding them your questions. So it's never too soon to start getting those questions coming in. And speaking of people coming in, I notice we have about 30 people in the room today from all over Australia. It's fantastic to have you so interested in church planning and particularly in assessment. Now, we're going to be recording today's session, and we'll make the link available to the video and the recording of today's session about 24 hours after we've had this presentation, which means that you'll be able to click on that and get all of the sort of stuff that you've actually been listening to. So no need to be rushing down with notes and things like that. Before we get underway, though, it's really important for us to thank EA Insurance for making this webinar possible. If you haven't sorted out the insurance side of church planning yet, then we'd recommend you start with a chat with EA. They can help you sort out everything from public liability to building, property, contents insurance, as well as let you know about all the sorts of things you might not have thought of yet. ea.org.au is really the best way to sort of start that journey in insurance when it comes to church planning. Now, on to our host today. Al Stewart is our host, and he's a founding director of Geneva Push, a church planner in his own right, and a man who has spent decades in frontline ministry. This is probably one of the most flattering photos we can find of that particular head. I'd like to introduce the voice that goes with Al. Al, are you with us this morning?
Yes, I am, Mark. Take it easy on the decades and decades thing, mate.
No worries,
yep,
mate. I'm going to hand over to you now, and you can introduce Andrew.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, great to be with you this morning. Our guest this morning is Andrew Hurd, who is the senior pastor of EV Church on the Central Coast, just an hour or so north of Sydney. Andrew's been involved in ministry for decades and decades, like me, and God's doing great things up there at EV. You've been at EV for how long? It is 17 years now that you planted the church?
1996 we started, yeah.
Okay, and you've just opened up, or officially, or is it this weekend you open your new auditorium officially?
Yeah, this weekend we've built 2 buildings. The second building is the last one, well, this next little patch, and it's an auditorium, 1,100 seat auditorium. So we've got the official opening this weekend. Yeah.
Fantastic, mate. I hope it's not long till it's too small. That's great.
Yeah, pray God. Yeah.
Geneva Push has been going about 4 and a bit years now. And we've developed an assessment process. Before I ask you about it, Andrew, I might just give a quick overview of what the process looks like. Basically, it works that when someone rings up or emails, contacts Geneva, their first contact will be with Scott Sanders, our smiling general manager. Scott will have an initial interview, and then if people decide to proceed, there's probably about 12 hours work in preparing for an assessment. There's a series of questionnaires from those who are people like kind of 360 degrees around the potential planter, older, younger, peers. We're looking for plans about the plant and how it might proceed, where they're up to. We ask for a sermon to be submitted. There's Lifeway questionnaires in terms of not quite psych testing, but information about ministry experience. If the planter is married, and most are, their wife is asked to fill out an extensive questionnaire about her Christian walk, how she feels about the plant, etc. They're both asked theological questions, etc. The actual assessment interview happens 2 hours plus. We insist that the wife and the husband are both there if they're married, and then they're interviewed by 3 people who are experienced in ministry and planting. And we insist that one of the interviewers be a woman, and usually it's a married couple and one other person. And then from that, there's a detailed letter sent out to the planting couple with recommendations and so on. How close am I, Andrew? Do you want to tweak
Yeah,
that?
no, that's how my experience has gone. Yeah, it's been good.
Okay, excellent. Now first question for you then, mate. When you and Kathy, and it's usually you and Kathy together, your wife, when you're doing an assessment interview, what's your main aim? What are you trying to do? It's nice to have a chat with people for 2 hours, but what are you really trying? What's your aim?
Yeah, look, the big thing is, as we go into this kind of thing, is to really be helpful. I think if you boil it down, the way we think about it is we just want to be a help. This is not, I say to all the guys that I've interviewed that it's not a job interview. No one needs our permission to plant a church. We want to avoid the day wherever that is the implication that you need someone's permission. Anyone can preach the gospel, teach the Bible, seek to evangelize. So our view is that we're there to help. We want to be involved in the couple's life so that we can get to know them as best we can, and perhaps see things that they've not seen, get into their heads, their world, their life, try and understand them as well as we can so that we're in the best place possible to advise whether or not planting is the best course for them to go down. That's basically it.
So usually, is it usually a positive experience as you have this kind of in-depth conversation with people?
Look, well, it depends what you mean by positive, of course. No, I think it can be hard sometimes because we're not playing with blanks. You know, it's not just a game we're playing, and so it's real lives, and the cost is significant, and so it's the time to be honest. You know, graciously and warmly and all of that, but it is an opportunity to really get someone, look at your lives, consider your suitability and make some recommendations, and sometimes they can be hard, but the wounds of a friend, you know, it's kind of the reality that is the best course to take, to actually open yourself up like that.
So good for you, but not necessarily easy.
Yeah, that's right. Now, it's positive if you go into it not with the firm decision that I want to plant, and if they get in my way, that'll be a problem. But if you go into the interview as the person being interviewed, thinking, you know, I want to be helped and I want to have people look into my life, then it will always be a positive experience because you'll get some good insights and good thoughts involved. Yeah.
Okay. Can you drill down a little bit more on that? To be helpful, it's not a job interview. You know, where you don't have to do what these people say. What are you looking at particularly? You know, what are some of the things that, boxes that you want to tick? Does this man or this couple, do they, any particulars?
Yeah. Look, the thing with planting is that it is different to established church ministries. The thing I've been saying to people recently is that it's both established church ministry and planting are both walking on tightropes, but it's just that one's doing it in the backyard and the other one's doing it across the Grand Canyon. So that ministry and church planting, or established church planting, they're both doing the same, or in the best cases they should be both doing the same thing, which is seeking to make disciples, convert people and establish them in the faith. It's just that church planting is doing it in a more risky environment, which means one of the first things I'm looking for is whether the guy that we're talking to is resilient. Do they have the capacity to cope with new things, the capacity to work in a context without structure, the capacity to cope in a context where, you know, you lose one or two families from a church plant and it really feels like your survival's on the line. Whereas if you lose one or two families in an established church, you will keep going, the church will continue to exist. So there's a lot more risk involved. But of course, actually, the sameness is only in the best of ministries, so that established churches and church plantings all should be about making disciples, converting people and deepening them. And so what we want in all ministries, we actually need, though, in church planting, if I just explain that. That is, in an established church ministry, it's easy to get away with not making disciples. The church will just keep rolling on. But if you can't establish church, if you can't make disciples, see people converted, see people established in the faith, if you can't do that, then in a church plant, it will be dead. And so what we particularly need to see is that guys that are presenting for church planting are, are committed to making converts, that's their relentless passion, and they've evidenced that in their previous history of ministry. If you haven't got that, then church planting, you might make it work because you transfer other people, but that's not what we're about. And so we urgently need to see guys coming with a relentless passion to make converts, to have a gospel clarity themselves, and have seen evidence of that. There's a first couple. There's a whole bunch of other ones.
Mm-hmm.
You want to dig into those?
Okay.
I'll give you a bunch of others. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Just like a few. Okay, so the relentless passion to make disciples because you grow or you die.
Yeah.
What's the difference between being resilient and insensitive? That might be a hard question for you, but what's the...
Yeah, resilient is that you are determined and will keep going, but that can easily slide into the kind of insensitivity that doesn't care what's happening around me. And if that's how you operate, then you'll crush people, and people won't follow you, and you won't build a team, and you won't multiply yourself beyond your own abilities.
Yep.
So we need guys, of course, who've got tact and diplomacy together with that relentless determination to move forward.
So resilience not the same as being the Terminator. It's that passion that keeps you going. Okay. Yeah. Another couple. What other areas are you particularly? What doors will you push on to see in the interview?
Yeah. Well, like that actually. The resilient thing. It's the ability to get people behind you for something. So we want to see that guys can gather people around them for a cause, for a purpose, which is not the same as actually being the boss who just tells people what to do, but it is actually persuading and wooing and winning volunteers, people who don't need to be with you, to want to be about what you're about and go where you want to go. And so that kind of leadership skill, that leadership gifting, we want to see that. We want to be able to see guys who can move from the idea of a dream about the future into an implementation to bring that dream into reality. So it's the guy who can work out, where I want to get to and where we together want to go, what are the tasks needed to be done, then have the discipline to actually implement those tasks. And so along with that, a guy needs to have a strong sense of responsibility, that they will take responsibility for something. They've demonstrated that in their lives. They don't blame others. They don't look for circumstances as excuses. They take responsibility for their own lives, their own work, and they create responsibility among others. I think you can add too, we want to see guys who are principle-driven, men and women who actually think from principles, theological principles, out to practice, which means they'll be more flexible. Church planting context requires you to, every ministry context, it's important to have it, but church planting requires it, that you be flexible, you be able to move with the circumstances and situations. I'd add too, actually, we want to see a solid marriage. That a man and woman are in together is actually very important.
I tell you what, I'll come back to the marriage one because that's a major one. Can you say a little more about the principle-driven thing? So you want to check that people have correct evangelical theology, but what do you mean by principle-driven? What is it? What's the difference between that? What are you looking for there?
Yeah. We're not just wanting to establish franchises around the country where we give the whole box and dice of here's what you do, next step, bang, and you just lay it out. We actually want to create ministries where people work from the principle of make disciples through faithful proclamation of the gospel, prayerfully by godly living. There's kind of the foundational inputs we want men to take out. Gathering a community around those things and being on mission. But doing that in Broken Hill will be different to doing it in Surrey Hills, will be different to doing it on the Central Coast, will be different to doing it in Melbourne, will be, each of these places requires someone to think about the particular circumstance, the particular subculture they're in, the particular people they've got, who they are, the gifts they bring, and so think from the principles of achieving an outcome of reaching people for Christ, and being flexible enough to work with the different circumstance and situation to bring that about. So that the principles there, the principles are established, but the practice of how I implement will be slightly different in many different contexts.
Right. So there's really theology. Your theology is the same, but you can adapt what you do into your culture. Is that what you're?
Yeah. Well, certainly theology. So we want theology to drive us, but overlaid on the foundations of theology are certain ministry values. That we're into substance, not just style. We want to care about sacrificial living and not just fluff. And so these kind of values are in addition to your theological convictions, and we want those values to be the principled ministry structure and style that is implemented with different practice. So it's discerning, having the kind of character that's able to discern what it is that is non-negotiable, what it is that shapes me and my ministry, and what things I can shift and change and rework to actually make it function well in this place. So it's discerning all of that is quite important.
Okay, here's another couple of questions then. In terms of giftedness, does a church planter need to be a great evangelist? Now, I know guys who are great evangelistic preachers or brilliant one-to-one evangelists. Do you need to be a great evangelist to be a church planter?
Look, I think it's helpful to have you must have a passion for mission and evangelism, absolutely. We don't want to run church plants that are simply about maturing believers, and because all it will become is an attractor to believers. We need to have missions that are church plants that are mission-minded. But as someone who is personally gifted as the evangelist, look, I don't think that's absolutely essential, and in some cases can be detrimental. Actually, there's a circumstance where you might be a very gifted evangelist but not know how to mobilize a team of people to be on mission. If we're going to build churches that grow and impact the country, we need to do more than just one man grabbing one convert every couple of weeks, as wonderful as that might be. We need someone who can lead a team, a growing team of people to be on mission themselves. So they have to have more than just a gift for mission. They have to have a passion for mission and the leadership ability to impact others with that, to get them on mission together. So yes, some abilities in evangelism personally is important. A relentless desire for mission is absolutely critical, and the ability to lead others to be on about mission is critical.
Okay, you can see how you'd want this in kind of everyone who's in full-time ministry. But what about preaching? Some people are gifted to be just kind of sparkling preachers. You can't help but listen to them. They're engaging. I have noticed though that God made a lot of average preachers. He likes average people. He made lots of us. So, do you need to be a sparkling preacher to be a church planter?
No, you don't need to be a sparkling preacher, but you need to be someone, as I mentioned before, that can gather people around what you're on about, and that does require skills in communication at some level. It requires the ability to articulate a vision, communicate it, get people excited by it, that they want to join in on it, and that almost always translates into some abilities publicly to communicate to larger groups than two or three. And so, we want churches that do centre around the scriptures, and so that means the kind of communication skill where I can take the Word of God and unpack it, explain it, help people see what God's about, capture them up in it. So there is some ability certainly in communication, although it doesn't need to be. You don't need to be a brilliant preacher, but you've got to have some abilities in that area. So one of the things we do in assessment is, we'll listen to sermons, we'll We'll see what a person's like as a communicator. And in all of that, though, I mean, one of the things that's so critical is the burning passion, the heart. Do you know? I mean, Al, you do this so brilliantly, but you might not be the great rhetorician that kind of people just hang off your words, but what becomes evident, and Australians are drawn to this, is just a heart that's sincere and genuine, captured yourself by the things of Christ and wants others to be captured. That comes through, and if we're not seeing that, there's a great concern as we assess something.
Yes. Yeah, people can tell whether you're for real. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me move on. Our time. One of the things that Geneva's got a policy about is that if the church planter's married, his wife must be at the assessment interview, and there's also quite a lot of information asked of her beforehand, so questionnaires and all sorts of things about her. Why is it so important that she be there and be part of it all?
Yeah. Look, there's a couple of stoppers for a person going off into church planting. Ministry as well, but church planting. And one of them is, if the wife is not a full partner in the plant, then we are that would be the end of it for us. We would recommend they wouldn't go into planting. Now, the reason being, there's a few reasons. One is that when you go into a planting context, you don't have many supports around you. There's not a whole established church that you can get back up from and support. And so if your wife is not in it with you, then there's not many other places you can turn to for support. So you need her to be with you in it. Also, if she's not with you in it, it's evidence that you can't even lead your own family. And so if you haven't displayed the kind of leadership skills that mean I can persuade the one closest to me to be a partner in this work, then that's a concern. But further to that, when you start a church, you have so few resources that we need every single body to be on task. And there's a million things that need to be done. And if the wife is not prepared to roll up her sleeves and get in and do whatever needs to be done as well, then it just won't get done. It's very rare to be able to gather a big enough team that you can have people not doing anything. So it's just a reality of the lack of support, lack of resource. We need everyone in.
I suppose as a template then, there's certain particular jobs that are lined up in advance for a wife and what she has to do, that she, here's the wife thing and the job she's got to do. Is that the way it operates?
Not at all. No, not at all. So that our wives are all cut from different cloths, and so that, with a church plant, there's so many different things that need to be done. It's not a matter of the wife must, run the women's group. She must run the Sunday school, but she must be partnering with the man in such a way that whatever gifts she has to bring, she will exercise those for the good and furtherance of the cause of this particular plant. And it is a case of the man and woman together working out what is the best way to use both your giftings and so on, for sure. But the reality is, if you want to get a church plant established that reaches into the community, we will have to run a kids ministry, and someone's going to have to do it, and it might well end up having to fall to the wife for that. So there has to be some flexibility with all of that as well.
Yep. Okay. Moving on. As you're talking with a couple about to planning to plant a church, are there particular kind of red flags that go up, or alarm bells, whatever cliche you want to choose, that someone says something and you think, whoa, wait, stop? That's any particular kind of red flags that you've noticed or looked for?
Yes, there are, and these aren't said so that people avoid these red flags. But the thing we're looking, if I hear that someone's unconverted, obviously, that's the end of it. We want people to get the gospel quite clearly, but also if they're undirected. That is, if I'm listening to a person, the man particularly who conducts his previous ministries to this point with little planning, vague, without any kind of driving principle that runs it all, if they're just undirected, then that's for me a big flag that planting is not something that they ought to be going into, and in fact they ought to be thinking about their previous ministries as well. But there's one. Another one is if someone's never actually led personally, if they've never themselves led someone else to Christ, I wonder, it's a flag for me to wonder how relentlessly committed to evangelism they are. They may not have been the great evangelist that leads hundreds to Christ, sure, but if they've never seen anyone come to faith through their ministries, then that's evidence that there's something going on there that needs to be considered further. If they're too young, planting requires considerable robustness and resilience, and someone who's too young needs some more tempering and maturing. If someone's never built a ministry, if someone's never actually exercised the kind of leadership and gifts required to gather people for a particular purpose and had them join them in that, then I worry that they've not got the gifts to gather a church plant team together. If they're not good in conflict, there's another flag too as well.
Right. I know there are questions, particularly about have you had conflict in your church, how to, with Christian leaders and so on.
Yeah.
What's too young? Is too young a number, or is it not that simple?
Look, yeah, it is a number. I think, I think someone in their early 20s would have to be an extraordinary person to be able to overcome that age concern.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, every now and then God throws up the Spurgeon, and so in our ministries with Geneva, we're conscious that it's not a rule, but typically, the Bible's wisdom is to not lay hands on the young convert, the young man. So it's the presbyter who is older. It's the very nature of the word, and so there is an age, but it's not as simple as hard and fast. Of course, there's the extraordinary, mature young man. But it's rare, it's unusual.
But for someone, you're saying for someone early 20s to do this, that's the extraordinary.
Yes, yes.
And so generally you're looking into late 20s, kind of...
early 30s, that's right, yeah. There is an issue as you get older again, that it isn't fatal. Although as you get older it becomes fatal, doesn't it? But it's not that you can be too old. It's not that the 50-year-old can never plant a church. But again, there is because it is a lot of risk, you need a lot of energy and drive. Typically, we're looking for men who have that. And the fact is, as you age, some of that fades, although again there are those extraordinary men who bring so much experience to the task that they can keep planting and planting. So there's a general rule of thumb with exceptions.
Okay. Another question for you. Church planters, entrepreneurs, go-getters, it's getting a room full of church planters is a bit like trying to herd cats. How do you balance kind of entrepreneurialism, go-getter, etc., versus being unteachable? Is that a problem with church planters, or those who would be sometimes, that they're unteachable?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. We've not noticed it in the Australian context as much as the Americans express concern about it. So it's been interesting considering the research into church planting in America and then seeking it to discuss its applications here. The alpha male who's the go-getter in America can be the man who stomps over every other personality and crushes people around them. We don't get that as much in Australia. It's interesting, and I think it's because our assessment processes happen much earlier, in that there's a bit of sifting out in ministry among evangelicals particularly, where your models of ministry don't tend to allow the Terminator-style guy to flourish. And so I think it's a little bit of a different context. And two, the Australian psyche and personality, I think, doesn't lend itself to it.
And there's there's a certain level of humility in going to an assessment process anyway.
Yeah, that culls that particular kind of person. So I've not noticed it as much. Yeah, I've not seen it as a great issue amongst us. I actually think if we have a problem, it is that we're not seeing enough people learn to step up and take a lead. And so that's something we need to nurture around us amongst our young guys, that we get them to encourage them to exercise leadership and push forward more. But no, I've never met that man yet in assessment. Perhaps he's out there and I've not met him yet.
Okay. One more quick one, and then Mark, I'll have there's questions and so on. I've got lots of questions coming. Is there an ideal time to be assessed relative to wanting to start a church plant? So how many years, you get assessed 10 years before you're ready to start, or if you get assessed 2 days before you want to start? My guess is that's a problem. Is there kind of an ideal time?
Yeah. Look, we were dreaming about planting a church 10 years out from when we actually did it. And so the idea percolated through our lives for many, many years as we were forming and thinking. But if you go through, we didn't have formal assessment back then, of course, but if you go to an assessment process too soon, it's a waste of energy and resource, because you're still likely forming in your ministry mind, and it's still too far out until I'm still a little bit uncertain as to whether you'll go down the path. So we like to kind of encourage guys to think no more than 3 years, maybe 4 years out. If you do it too close to the plant, then your bags are packed, and any honest assessment that might suggest you ought not do it will be very hard to hear. And so we like to say to guys, make sure you do it at least 2 to 3 years out from the plant. So not longer than 3 to 4, but not closer than 2 years. So you've actually got a real assessment process that might throw up issues you'd not considered, which might suggest you don't go ahead with it.
Okay. One last question. At the end of an assessment interview, we pray together. Then the couple, assuming it's a married couple, receive a letter with detailed feedback and then some recommendations. What are the possible recommendations that come from an assessment interview?
Yeah, look, the language of recommendation is a good one, actually, because it doesn't say fail. No one fails. It's all it is advice and recommendation from people who have been in it. But yeah, there's 4 options. The assessment process will give a conclusion that recommends the person goes forward and continues down the path. And if that's the case with Geneva, a recommendation from Geneva, it means that we'll work on getting a coach linked up with the planting couple to help them then continue to work through the process. The second option is that you'll get recommended, but with conditions. That is to say, the assessment's shown some areas of training still to be done, some areas of weakness that need to be worked on. So it might be, the condition is that you work on a planting plan that's clarified and sharpened more than it is, or that there are areas in the marriage that need to be considered and worked on, or that theological study needs to be undertaken because you're just too raw. So there'll be conditions sometimes given. The third option is that we encourage a man to reapply, come back in 2 years' time, having worked on a few things. There's further experience needed. The last one is that we would say, in some cases, a number of cases, we're saying to guys, look, we just don't recommend planting as the ministry path to pursue. There are other ministry options we think that your gifts suggest that you ought to give yourself to, and you'd be more effective in those places. So there's your 4 options.
Okay. And then if it's recommended, as you said, Geneva will organise the right coach depending on the context of the plant, and then a whole lot of other things within the network. Andrew, I'm going to go over to questions now. I'll just feed them to you, mate, and we'll get your wisdom. Here's a question from Philip. What would you advise a couple where the wife of the couple has a chronic condition where symptoms are aggravated by stress, but she's very supportive and has good skills for church planting? So some kind of, I guess, chronic medical condition, etc., symptoms aggravated by stress, but she's supportive and has good skills.
Look, there's...
And we don't know who we're talking about. This is a hypothetical from Philip.
Yeah. Look, in an assessment process, you'd want to dig into what that actually looks like and means to determine whether it was so problematic that planting was not the best path. It does need to be said that we need gifted, skilled men and women to turn existing churches around. And so, if there are significant stress-related concerns, that a thing that's aggravated by stress, I wouldn't go into planting. But you'd want to actually look at the particulars.
Okay.
I should say, planting is very stressful. As you know, it's the potential fears and anxieties and grief is intensified many times over. I did many years of church ministry, normal established church ministry, and there's plenty of fear and stress involved in any ministry. But starting a new church every week was hard in mouth stuff.
I'm still at the stage where I wait 15 minutes early and think, will any of them turn up this week?
Yeah.
It's stressful. Here's one from Scott. How important is it for your wife to be on board? Now, he's just asking again, can you just go over, if your wife is basically saying, look, let him do what he wants, it's okay, I don't mind, versus how much does she really have? Is it really a deal breaker?
Yeah. Look, here's the thing about it not being a permission. Look, God surprises us and works through people and couples that you wouldn't expect. It's a miraculous work of God that He can do. He can make, but humanly speaking, from our particular experiences, seeing men and women at work in church planning, if the wife is not supportive, I would strongly urge you not to go into it. There's lots of other ministries. Go into another context. Be a core team member. Don't head up a church plan, because if your wife's not supportive, it will make it even harder to gather the core group. It will make it even harder to actually work out all the ministries that need to be done and have people fill them. It'll make it even harder to model to a small group of people what it is to be sacrificially committed to the task. It's just you are setting roadblocks for the ability of a plant, humanly speaking, to work.
Okay. Yes, and that is a big one that we're looking for, isn't it, in Geneva, that she's on board. Do you think sometimes it's just that he hasn't taken the time to listen to her concerns? I've had an interview with one woman asking, where will we live, how will we be paid, where will the kids go to school? And he hadn't even thought about it. Yeah.
Look, if a wife is not supportive of the man's ministry, it is evidence of a failure of leadership for the man. If I can't persuade my wife to be supportive of this task, then either it's evidence that she's seeing something I'm not seeing, which in itself is a problem. She's seeing that, Andrew, you just don't have these gifts, and I'm not persuaded you've got them. And if I can't, well, that's a good thing.
Our wives do know us very well.
They do. And if she's not supportive, then I've not been able to persuade her of the value, the merit of this, or she's aware of her own gifts and abilities and knows that she can't do it. And in that case, your comment's exactly right. Then the man is not listening. He needs to heed his wife, and if she's not able to pull it off, he needs to take heed to that. As a leader, he'll be very inadequate if he's a man who can't even listen to his wife.
And there's many other different ministries that we can be involved in. Here's a question from Paul, and I, as I say this, I know you had a very significant birthday last year, Andrew, so don't feel threatened. Paul asks, can you be too old to plant a church?
Well, look, as a rule, but there are exceptions. So I think because planting by its nature is kind of the tightrope across the Grand Canyon, there's more risks involved. you need to be really on your game, energetic, because your lead from the front in a plant is what energizes a group of 30, 40 people to be energized themselves. And as you age, the reality is the energy does diminish. And if you've not got the energy to really drive a work, then you won't get much momentum. Now, there are exceptions, of course, so that, there's lots of older men that continue to have good drive and have worked out how to work smart, so
yes.
that, with the reduced energy, they're actually working efficiently and really well. And they're, so yes, of course, there are exceptions.
There's also one way less risk. As you get old and crusty and you've been married for 100 years and you've done ministry together for decades, the personal risk factor is less. But the energy level's less, definitely. Question from Jackson. Are there areas of sin, past or present, that would mean a recommendation against planting? Are there areas of sin, past or present, that would mean a recommendation against planting?
Yeah. Just off the cuff, two issues. The first one is past sin. The area where that would be a problem is in the reputational area. That is to say, we want leaders of churches to be men of good standing, and if a past sin was of the kind that it might come back to haunt the reputation of a man planting, then yes, that would be a reason not to plant, because the risk would be too great. But the second reason why it would be a problem is the risk of reoffence. That is, that the nature of the history of sin was such that it's the kind of sin that's not been really dealt with. It continues to haunt the person as a risk, a weakness, a kind of a flaw. And if that's the case, then the stresses of planting might reignite that particular sin and cause you to be back in a context of dreadful. Yeah. So I'd say they're your two issues.
Okay, we're most vulnerable when the emotional tank is empty. Here's an interesting question from Jordan. Has anyone ever planted with Geneva's approval who hasn't been through a 3 or 4 year theological degree?
Yeah. We've got planters, Geneva's supporting planters who have not done 3 or 4 year theological degrees. Our sense is that that's, again, an unusual circumstance that's not ideal, because it's very hard to catch up theologically and get sufficient depth to carry a ministry forward if you don't give dedicated time to it. But there are some circumstances and situations. There's one in Melbourne where an older man actually, Geneva's recommended, and he's part of the network together with all of us of planting, where he's older and he's not done theological education, but the circumstances are such that the need is so great, his passion's for it's there, God's given him the go, the energy. We're wanting to back him and support him and try and backfill with some theological support as he goes along.
Right. It's a little bit like you said about age, that you can be really young, but the presumption is that you'll be kind of late 20s or older. You can do it without a theological education, but the presumption is people normally would. Is that, how close am I?
Yeah. I would perhaps not use the word presumption, but the wisest course, humanly speaking, seems to be get some really solid, deep theology into you, so that as you start the plan, you can bring that whole character formation to bear and give it the best human chance to flourish and grow as people are drawn to the depth and riches of the things of Christ. That's the best way to go, humanly speaking. But the exceptions are so, God throws up men and circumstances where we want to back and support and help, even though it's not ideal.
Okay, yep. Here's a question from Ben. How much bearing does experience in a parish setting have upon being considered as a church planter? I guess work, it's kind of normal garden variety work in a church, he would mean, upon my being considered as a church planter.
I depend entirely on the exercised. So that there are church ministries where, you know, it's like falling to the Shire in Hobbitville where everyone's sleepy and the ministries are drifting along, and to have been engaged for 5 years and drifting along is no great help at all for planting. But there are, of course, other ministries where all the same activities of a plant are actually happening. Disciples are people are being converted, being nourished and deepened, and a guy in that work has been exercising leadership and gathering. So it depends entirely on the ministry that someone's been in before. So it's not an automatic, just because someone's had 5 years of ministry experience in a church, established church, that doesn't make them suitable for planting.
There might even be places where that's a negative.
Well, exactly. If you've been running in the Shire, you know, no, I don't mean Cronulla. I mean.
Yeah. So, folks, he does not mean the Sutherland Shire. But please,
yes,
don't email us. He did not mean the Sutherland Shire.
Right. Yeah. If you've been in a sleepy church where nothing's changed, nothing's grown, you've not exercised any leadership, of course, it's a concern. If you've been 5 years on, having sat in a ministry that's on the front line and not actually taken it forward, then that would be a negative, actually.
Yeah.
So no, it's not automatic at all.
Okay, a question from Werner. How would you measure the ownership of that vision between the church planter and his core group when a church is planting? Do you want me to read you that one again? How would you measure the ownership of that vision between the church planter and his core group when church planting?
Okay, I might have got the question wrong, but I think one of the key measures of whether you are communicating a vision and people are captured by it is simply the amount of time they're prepared to sacrifice to give to the work and how much money they're prepared to sacrifice to give to the work. That's the measure. I mean, I think in any ministry, of course, it's the same. The evidence that someone's captured by the work of the gospel and the vision to make disciples is how much they're prepared to give to it. Time, resource. So I'm looking for a core group to see whether they're using time that they might otherwise have used. They're actually bending their efforts to church planting. Yep.
Okay. That's a very concrete measure of buy-in. Yeah. Question from Joel. As a potential church planter, how important is it to have the fruit of friends or family becoming Christians?
Friends and family are the hardest ones to convert in some senses. So that my immediate family, parents, brothers are unconverted, and I've been working on them for 35 years. It's not that friends and family, it's that you've seen converts in your ministry somewhere, somehow. I mean, this buys into a critique that I particularly have of missional ministry, actually. One of the dangers with missional ministry is that we can easily invest too much for too long in those closest to us to no fruit, no effect. It's often the people one step out from us that are more accessible. You find the low fruit. And part of what I want to see in a guy that is putting forward for planting is that he's got the wisdom and wherewithal to think strategically about investing his mission time. And so, I don't use up all my time with my next door neighbour, because it might be 3 doors down the person who's actually God working to bring an interest in a heart. And my task is to find those people and not just obsess about friends and family only.
So you mean maybe less intense contact with more and more people is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a strategic thing that is brought to bear here in that it's like opal mining. You can finding a convert is you can dig one hole and invest your life in my neighbours, and you'll see one or two people respond. Or you can cast broadly to find the seam, the place where God has gone before and is beginning to work in someone's life. You can cast around to find the seam and mine the seam. And I guess we want to be seeing in a planter the ability to think strategically a little like that.
Yep.
We haven't got the luxury of investing in the half a dozen people who live around me only. You know, I want to pray for them. I want to make the most of every opportunity. But, you know, 2 suburbs away or 2 streets away, God's at work, and I want to find those.
Yes. Yes. Okay, a couple more quick ones. We haven't got we've got 5 minutes left. Mark asks, do you have to have a core group in place?
Not for assessment, no. We're wanting to assess to determine whether we encourage you to go forward, and we'll want to have seen that, as I say, you've got a history somewhere where you've been able to gather people to a task, gather people for a purpose to go somewhere. We want to have seen that somewhere in your history. It might be that, you know, you created a beach mission team out of nothing. It might be that you started a youth group where there didn't exist before, or you started an evangelistic team at church and gathered 10 people to join you in that task. They're all evidences that you can gather a team, and that's part of the assessment we're looking for.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Grant. What are your thoughts on co-planting, as in 2 guys planting a church together? My guess is he means kind of co-leading. You've got a partnership of 2 church planters.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, mate?
Oh, I think it's making a hard task harder. I don't think it's fatal. I think, you know, God can use the extraordinary circumstance of 2 men who work well together and complement each other and bat off each other, but it will be harder because there are the complexities of leadership that it creates, which will make it hard for a team that's gathered. But not impossible, but just hard. I just think you make something that's hard already very much harder.
Is it possible to work together if your gifts complement one another?
Yeah,
so if you've got the great preacher and the gifted administrator or something, is that different?
Well, you still need the reality of humankind is that we need leadership structures that reduce tensions and confusions, and clarity comes from clear authority structures. Now,
so are you saying you need someone who's the boss? Not a dictator, but someone's the boss, and as that's clear, it takes tension out of the whole thing. Is it?
Yeah, I think so, but it's not. It is. You get the right synergy between 2 men, and you can manage that difficult circumstance. So I wouldn't want to suggest it's impossible to do it, but it's just making a hard task harder. That's all I'm saying, and it's because of the lack of clarity. Yeah.
Okay, one last question, mate. Jeremy asks, and it's a good question to finish on. What happens if you're given a no, inverted commas, a no answer in assessment? What next?
Yeah.
So you're told not recommended. What next?
Yeah. Can I just say, we want to urge men and their wives to come into the assessment process thinking a passion about the cause, not their place in it. And what I mean by that is, you know, when I present for the war effort, I don't want to be so sold on being the pilot of a plane that if I get a no about being the pilot for the plane, I give up. No, my commitment is winning the war, and I'm looking for help to see where I can best fit in that effort. And so when I come into an assessment, I want to come in going, look, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to help the cause of the gospel go forward. I'm thinking that planting is something that I might serve and suit best. Help me. So that if the answer comes no, that's not what we think is the best place, then you're not crushed. You go, well, let me find another place where I can best serve the cause of the gospel. And with the assessment process, that some of that will come out actually, where it might be I then get advice, so there are other places that I can best apply my gifts and skills. And if you've got a heart for planting, one of the ways to do it is to join a core team, to be a core team member, if you really want to be part of a plant.
Although if someone's just been through Bible college, it might be, and is hoping to be in paid ministry, that can be. What would you recommend to someone that's just come through 3-4 years Bible college? They've got their hand up about assessment. The team said no. What kind of next step? Well, what should they do? Go and talk to who? What?
Well, talk to the assessment team. And we trust too that all of this happens in the context of the Multiply conference each year. So you actually get to bounce around with other leaders. So grab Al, grab Scott, grab me, and talk about what are the other options. There's many and varied. But 3-4 years of Bible college doesn't guarantee a paid ministry position. And I want to create in people a heart that says, look, I've invested in this way, but there's lots of ways to use this experience, and it's not always in paid ministry. But yeah, going into a team ministry in another context, an established church, applying for a presbyter role in an established church, there's lots of other options. But don't live with a sense of entitlement that because I've had a theological training, I'm owed a paid position somewhere. No. The cause of the gospel is primary, and I fit in wherever I need to and can.
Actually, a big part of the assessment interview is in your letter. You'll be told what the assessment team thinks your gifts are. So there's a whole area of giftedness where maybe you should be looking would be there.
Yeah, and you can always come back to one of the assessment guys and have a conversation for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the good things about being assessed at Multiply. Everyone's around. Andrew, I'm getting the wrap up from Mark. Thank you for your time and your wisdom this morning. And I hope you have a great weekend, and as you open up the auditorium, and hope God continues to bless things at EB.
Yeah, thank you. It's good.
Good on you, mate. And I'll hand back to Mark.
Thanks very much, Al. Yes, I'm back on again. That's great. And thanks very much, everybody, for paying attention today. We've just been flooded with questions. That's been excellent. Something I want to draw your attention to before you actually leave today's webinar is the one that's coming up. We actually have another webinar coming on the 20th of March. We have one every month, but this one I think you'll be very interested in, particularly if you're trying to decide how to make your church the sort of church that wants to plant other churches and, in fact, draw other people in. So Craig Dobby and Mikey Lynch will be talking about building the evangelism machine. That's on Tuesday, the 20th of March, and registration is available on the Geneva Push website. Also, we'll be sending you an email directly after this event, and in that will be a link for you to go through if you want to register for that. Again, don't forget that the video of today's event will also be online, edited up, and with all our audio mistakes taken out. Thanks for your patience there. And again, we'll also have the opportunity for you to participate, send in questions. Those questions which we didn't get through, and there are a couple too, we'll be sending those off to Andrew, and hopefully he'll be able to jot down some quick answers, so keep an eye on the site for those. Before we finish, though, I'd like to thank again everyone at EA Insurance who are putting their support behind the planter sessions. EA helps out hundreds of Christian and community not-for-profits with their insurance needs. So if you have insurance questions for your church plant, Geneva recommends you get in contact with ea.org.au. And on behalf of our guest, Andrew Hurd, as well as the team and Al, our host at Geneva Push, my name's Mark Hadley, and we hope you've had a good day. Thanks for joining us and taking the time to view this presentation.